Isolated from the rest of the world, New Zealand has always been home to some of the weirdest creatures on the planet. Giant birds that didn't fly. Mammals that do. Insects as big as rodents. And reptiles older than the dinosaurs. A bird as intelligent as an ape. And the world's rarest, fattest parrot. Tonight, I'm going to take you back through time to witness how massive tectonic upheavals and millions of years of isolation turned New Zealand into a floating laboratory, pumping out these evolutionary mutants. I will uncover clues which will reveal astonishing new facts about the origins of our iconic animals and expose a dark secret that could turn our national identity upside down. From the ancient past of our best-loved bird. "20 million years ago, all of New Zealand looked like locations from Lord of the Rings. But instead of hobbits, elves and black riders, all these spectacular environments were populated with birds. In this ancient time, New Zealand had one major difference to the rest of the world. 20 million years ago, long after the reign of the dinosaurs had ended, the rest of the planet was becoming dominated by mammals in every ecosystem. From what we know, the islands of primeval New Zealand had only one mammal, but in keeping with our theme, it was pretty strange. It's fitting that in a land of birds, our strange little mammal also has wings. Although they rarely carry them above 10 meters high. But the really weird thing is that unlike normal bats, New Zealand's short-tailed bat prefers to walk. While on the ground, this furry little gremlin folds up his delicate wings like a retractable undercarriage, allowing him to waddle around on his elbows, with his wings tucked neatly out of the way. There's a critical clue in what these little bats eat, even today, that hints at why primeval New Zealand was so different to the rest of the world. Short-tailed bats feed at night on the forest floor, eating everything from nectar to fruit and bugs. So unless you're a bug, the only native mammal here is not a predator, nor a threat in birdland. In primeval New Zealand, there were no stoats, cats or rats, and the forest floor provided bush tucker for all. Many birds just didn't need to fly. So they gradually lost the use of their wings. Birds even evolved to fill vacancies in the ecosystem usually filled by mammals. With just the short-tailed bats sniffing around the forest floor, our iconic Kiwi muscled in and took on the role of honorary mammal. Very few New Zealanders will ever see a Kiwi in the wild in their lifetime because A, they're very shy and nocturnal, and B, they're under threat and on the endangered list. But here at the Willowbank Wildlife Reserve in Christchurch, experts raise Kiwi chicks, and over the last 5 years, they've released over 320 of them back into the wild.
What I'll do is I'll just let him put his head in there, just because he likes it when it's dark. Good boy. And you can see those fantastic feathers.
Oh, that's extraordinary. It's actually quite coarse. It's like a fur.
Yeah, well, I reckon they feel like a bit like a German Shepherd.
Yeah.
You know, that sort of coarse fur on the outside and quite fluffy underneath.
Yeah.
But we'll see if we can see his wing. It's just under here. There we go.
See this nub? Millions of years ago, that would have been a fully formed, perfectly functioning wing. Now it's just a remnant of when kiwis needed to fly. Over millions of years, kiwi also evolved a range of bizarre adaptations, making them as much mammal as bird.
It's got a lot of mammalian features. They've got marrow in their bones, like mammals, unlike the sort of honeycomb structure flying birds have got. They've got 2 functioning ovaries, which is unusual for a bird. Their feathers are more like hair. Their eyesight's pretty average, but they've also got whiskers, a bit like a cat. They've got a very good sense of smell. So yeah, if you look carefully, right at the very tip there, right on the very, very end there, there's some nostrils. And they're the only bird in the world that has that. So they are really a very weird bird. But neat all the same.
Back in primeval New Zealand, our iconic kiwi also shared the forest floor with the ancient Powellophantus snail, a 200 million year old living fossil. But this giant snail, the size of your fist, won't eat your lettuces, because it hunts its prey. The giant snail's mouth parts are fitted with a vacuum feature, which sucks a worm in like a strand of Wattie's finest. After which, it settles in for an after-dinner nap. The ancient ancestors of this famous creature also lived alongside the giant snails in primeval New Zealand's forests. Tuatara are our most famous Triassic reptile. Tuatara ancestors survived the dinosaur extinction and flourished for 235 million years. For much of this time, they had many ancestor cousins around the world. But 60 million years ago, inexplicably, they all became extinct. And today, New Zealand's Tuatara are the last of their kind left on the planet. When Tuatara are born, they show evidence of a mysterious ancient feature. It's a third eye. You can't see it on the adults, but on babies, it's about there, and then it disappears under the skin as they grow. This is a freshly hatched baby Tuatara. Its third eye just visible at the top of its spiny vertebrae. Officially called a pineal eye, it has a cornea, retina, and lens like a real eye, and it can detect light. But it's still a mystery what its function actually was. When a baby Tuatara hatches, it instinctively knows to leave the burrow and find safety in the forest. As bizarrely, adult Tuatara are known to eat them. If they make it, they can reach up to 70 centimetres in length, and they'll outlast most of us, some living to well over 100 years, and it's thought that some of them could live to between 200 and 300 years. With an extremely slow metabolism, Tuatara can survive by eating just once a month. And sometimes, lunch walks right to them. Today, it's a weta. These ancient adversaries have also shared forest floors for the last 200 million years. In primeval New Zealand, weta evolved from a type of cricket into the insect of nightmares. The same evolutionary forces that allowed birds to run rampant in primeval New Zealand were also acting on the invertebrates, allowing them to become enormous. And that's where this fella comes in, the giant weta. And they're one of the heaviest insects on the planet. They can weigh up to 50 grams. Weta punga means god of ugly things, but he's not actually ugly, is he? He's kind of beautiful. It's like a sort of a steampunk animal. Okay, so primeval New Zealand was a unique paradise for birds and also home to some of the most ancient creatures on the planet. But our land has many secrets, and this is where the story of ancient New Zealand gets really weird. Scientists can tell from rocks like this limestone containing minuscule traces of marine sediments that even though this is now 700 metres above sea level, it was once all underwater. And a system of dating rocks called geochronology tells us that these rocks came topside around 23 million years ago. Here's the mystery. If our relatively young country was thrust from the ocean just 23 million years ago, how come the DNA lineage of the flightless Kiwi, the ancient snail, the Triassic tuatara and the giant weta are all so much older? Where on earth did they come from? And how did they get here? New Zealand as we know it is quite young, and yet some of our inhabitants are millions of years older. But this story has many more twists and turns yet.
Primeval New Zealand was extremely isolated, with its nearest neighbour, Australia, separated by over 1,600 kilometres of ocean. But was primeval New Zealand always so isolated? Because we have this major conundrum, where some of our native animals are much older than the land.
Believe it or not, this magnificent southern beech tree and the giant carnivorous snail are clues to solving this mystery.
200 million years ago, a supercontinent called Gondwana existed, made up of what would eventually become Australia, Africa, Antarctica, South America, and New Zealand. Around 83 million years ago, a sliver broke off the massive continent and, attached to its own tectonic plate, drifted into isolation. It was a continent in its own right, half the size of Australia, called Zealandia. Beech trees and giant snails were on board this continental raft, and fossil remnants of them are still found today in all the countries that were once part of Gondwana, even Antarctica.
So Zealandia took many Gondwanan plants and animals with it. The tuatara, the snails, the giant weta and many species of birds. All that makes sense. But there's a twist in this story that complicates everything that we've ever believed about the origins of our iconic native animals.
It was just 1995 when a Californian geologist published research claiming the existence of this ancient continent, naming it Zealandia. Since then, our geologists figured out that right from the beginning, Zealandia floated on a very thin crust, with little buoyancy, and that over 60 million years, it slowly sank, until most of the continent disappeared beneath the ocean, like Atlantis, where it lay submerged until about 23 million years ago. Underneath the drowned continent, tectonic plates began colliding again, until eventually they slammed together. And up came a fragment of ancient Zealandia. But This time it was New Zealand, as we know it today. The landscape of ancient Zealandia, lying beneath us at depths of up to 1,500 metres, is still visible today in a map of the sea floor. Modern New Zealand, peaking above sea level, is just 7% of the original continent.
So here's the million-dollar question. How much of Zealandia sank? Now, among scientists, this is a controversial debate. Now, some geologists say that Zealandia sank completely, while some biologists say it was only partly submerged. But if Zealandia sank completely, what happened to all those Gondwanan creatures?
It's possible some of them, like Tuatara, which can go for weeks without food, could have survived on rocky outcrops, or rafted across the ocean on storm debris. The argument that small island outcrops ensured the survival of many ancient animals when Zealandia sank is an established theory.
But this is where the science is still a work in progress. Our fossil record has so many gaps, it raises more questions than answers.
What we do know is that 23 million years ago, a new landmass lay in the Pacific Ocean, waiting for colonization.
South of New Zealand, on the way to Antarctica, lies a pristine island ecosystem, which some say illustrates the way primeval New Zealand would have looked when it first came up out of the water and was populated by its first inhabitants, seabirds.
The Snares Islands lie 150 kilometres south of Stewart Island, part of our subantarctic island group. Deep in the forest here, just before sunrise, sooty shearwaters, also known as muttonbirds, emerge from underground hollows to begin a strange morning ritual. They waddle along worn pathways, their numbers increasing at every intersection. Generations of habit telling them where to go. Shearwaters have good-sized wings, but it's not until the mob reaches a clearing on the edge of the island that their wings fire up. And finally, their intent becomes clear. High on a cliff edge, their destination is like a runway at the airport, which is how the shearwaters take off. This spectacle above the Snares Islands gives us a glimpse of how huge numbers of birds dominated primeval New Zealand. As massive colonies spread across the brand new islands, it was their droppings which fertilized the virgin land, allowing forests to flourish and become home to the ancient creatures which had survived Zealandia's sinking and now recolonized New Zealand.
But what about our flightless birds? Where do they come from?
Well, the answer to that is another twist in a tale, where nothing is quite what it seems. Deep in a primeval New Zealand forest, a wannabe mammal is enduring extreme discomfort. She's carrying the largest egg relative to body size of any bird on the planet. The egg is 6 times bigger than a hen's egg and fills her entire body, pushing against her internal organs with little room for any food. The female kiwi carries her huge egg for around 10 days.
Once she lays it, in a parental role reversal, it's the brown Kiwi dad that incubates the egg for around 3 months. The same pregnancy time for a similar-sized mammal. Finally, his patience is rewarded. As the Kiwi chick hacks its way into the world, the advantage of having such a large egg is revealed. The egg contains an internal yolk sac, which fills the hatchling's little pot belly, providing immediate nourishment, which can sustain it for up to 17 days. Each Kiwi chick born in New Zealand today brings with it a surprising genetic clue as to where their species originated and who their cousins are. Their DNA links them to an ancient bird family called ratite, which originated in Gondwana. They include the African ostrich, our moa, the Australian emu and cassowary, and last but not least, our Kiwi. We know that ancient New Zealand was part of Gondwana, so we assume our Kiwi and moa would have set sail on Zealandia and somehow survived the sinking. Except they didn't. The disturbing fact is, they were latecomers. Recent DNA profiling has revealed that moa and Kiwi ancestors were living alongside their ratite cousins in ancient Australia, well after Zealandia broke away from Gondwana. And the Kiwi's DNA shows it is more closely related to the Australian emu than it is to our moa. That means our national icon, the bird whose name we take to represent us, actually began as an Australian. So our Kiwi's ancestors evolved in ancient Australia 60 million years ago. Before these once functional wings eventually flew it here, long after Zealandia broke away. Moa branched off the ratite family tree much earlier than the Kiwi, but it's likely they flew across the Tasman Sea to primeval New Zealand around the same time the Kiwi did. Once these ancient ratites arrived in New Zealand, however, they began evolving into the iconic birds we celebrate today. So we've lost claim to 2 of our iconic birds. Are there others? Well, do we want to open this evolutionary can of worms? Meet 3 New Zealand natives, the kaka, the kakapo, and the kia. All 3 are descendants of a single ancient parrot. Is it possible it also had an Australian passport? Bad news, I'm afraid. Those ancient prototype genes did originate in Australia. Now, no one knows when that proto-parrot arrived here, probably blown on a howling westerly. But what we do know is that as soon as those ancestors were established, something truly weird began to happen. Through millions of years of evolution, the proto-parrot diverged into 2 groups. One became the Kakapo, and the other eventually split into Kia and then Kaka. Around 8 million years ago, the same tectonic plates that pushed the islands up out of the ocean collided again. But this time, New Zealand's spine was forced up over 3,500 metres, creating a dramatic alpine landscape. The Kia moved into the mountains,
and became the only alpine parrot in the world. Its plumage growing thick and weatherproof. And its beak mutated into a sharp tool, allowing it to scavenge protein from carcasses.
Renowned for stealing your lunch and for trashing your car in the ski-field car park, Kia are anything but bird-brained. Their intelligence may have helped them to cope with dramatic landscape change, and they're studied around the world as one of the smartest birds on the planet. But don't take my word for it. Watch this.
This puzzle, developed by a wildlife research team, is designed to test the Kia's ability to problem solve.
Here he goes, look. The intelligence of these creatures is just frightening. They've figured it out. They've pulled out the little dowels, they've moved the bits and pieces, they've got the cheese down, and all in about 5 minutes. These are wild animals. This is not something we've set up. Oh, sensational.
It's likely this ability to solve problems enabled Kia to thrive.
When only 2 million years ago, primeval New Zealand, along with the rest of the world, entered a period of ice ages.
It's also likely this is when the Kia's cousin, the Kakapo, evolved its ability to store fat, to keep warm. Somehow, this bird, which once flew, evolved from the slimline kaka ancestor into 4 kilograms of landlubber, preferring now to walk along the forest floor. He still has wings, but now they mostly just help him keep his balance as he climbs a tree in search of tasty rimu berries. Building wing muscle and powering flight requires a lot of energy. So the Kakapo traded flight for fat. In his case, an evolutionary triumph. If you think the Kakapo's feeding habits make life hard for them, their sex life is another inconvenience. In the dead of night, just once every 3 to 5 years, each male Kakapo treks to the top of a hill, where he must now put on the show of his life, as it's the female Kakapo that choose their mate. First step, make yourself even fatter. By inflating an air sac in his neck, he blows himself up to the size of a basketball for maximum attractiveness. Then he begins his serenade. First, a low-frequency boom advertises his location. When he suspects a female may be close, his song changes to a ching. Booming and chinging continue all through the night. But not all Kakapo are lucky on their first try. And tonight, this young fella returns home unsuccessful.
We're getting a pretty clear picture of primeval New Zealand as a land where birds evolve different lifestyles and behaviours, as so many of our New Zealand birds behave unconventionally when compared with their feathered friends elsewhere.
Takahe also signed up for flightlessness and became tussock dwellers, grazing the grasslands and high country, kind of like sheep. Takahe were relatively recent arrivals in primeval New Zealand, evolving from a swamp hen around 2 million years ago, originating in, you guessed it, Australia. The amazing thing is, the Takahe ancestor used to look just like these guys, the common pukeko, which were probably blown here from Australia just 300 years ago. But even in that tiny amount of time, pukeko are changing rapidly. Their Australian cousins can fly long distances, but here they are well on their way to becoming flightless. This is evolution in action. So it seems that many ancient Australian birds, either through choice or chance, ended up migrating to primeval New Zealand. But coming up next is a bird that's achieved celebrity status that we can lay claim to. Primeval New Zealand's 15,000 kilometre coastline was home to a huge complex food chain, with many global wanderers making regular journeys for a gastronomic orgy. 60 million years ago, it was these rich fishing grounds which created an opportunity for one of the most spectacular evolutionary flip-flops. An ancient seabird lived here, well before modern penguins existed, named Waimanu. Standing nearly 1 metre tall, Waimanu had wings like a flying seabird, but its body was changing shape towards what would eventually become a new aquatic seabird, the penguin. Rather than fly in the air, Waimanu was evolving to fly underwater as it chased the plentiful prey. But the body shape was a work in progress, and the drag of its wings slowed its streamlined body down, and eventually the prototype Waimanu became extinct as modern penguins evolved. Over millions of years, penguin radiated throughout the southern hemisphere. And in one in the eye for the Australians, New Zealand can claim to be Penguin HQ, with over 13 of the 17 species breeding in New Zealand waters, including this one, the most endangered, the yellow-eyed. Dunedin's Tairoa Head is a breeding ground for these rare birds. While down in our sub-Antarctic Snares Islands, the unique crested penguins have evolved a bizarre lifestyle. Like many penguins, their colony headquarters are deep in the forest, where they collect wood to make nests for their chicks. Penguin chicks' stomachs are like bottomless pits. So every day, Mum and Dad take turns to head off to catch the food. It's a long trek along forest paths for all parents on the same mission. And it's clear, evolution did not design their bodies for walking. At the forest's edge, their journey becomes treacherous. A 100-metre near vertical rock face between penguins and food for their chicks. It seems like an evolutionary joke that these birds can't take off and fly to their fishing grounds. But penguins are tough and resourceful. Even the youngsters learn the hard way. Once at the bottom, it's not over yet. As predatory sea lions patrol the water's edge. It's a bad day for a young penguin's first day out fishing. But But this time, he's safe. Once full of fish for their offspring, they mob up for safety and execute a mass exit. So begins the long walk back up the cliff to their forest colony. Over countless generations, these crested penguins on the Snares Islands put themselves through this ordeal every day, driven by a parent's instinct to feed their demanding chicks with food from the sea.
While we're on the subject of rightful claims, New Zealand has the only mainland breeding colony of these, the Royal Albatross. We can't claim them as ours though, because albatross are a truly ancient bird and they've always been global travellers. The Otago Peninsula has been a breeding nursery for these colossal seabirds for just 100 years. Royal albatross push flight to the extreme. The 3-metre wingspan creates just enough lift to raise their 10-kilogram body off the ground. But they're close to the limit of weight-to-flight ratio for a bird. Any heavier, and they could drop like a stone. So you think this bird is big? What if it grew talons the size of tiger claws and hunted like one too? Can New Zealand lay claim to one of the most terrifying monsters that ever flew? Primeval New Zealand was a paradise for birds, and so safe that many gave up flight for life on the forest floor. But as always in this contrary country, a mystery challenges the illusion of an innocent Eden. Many birds became nocturnal. And others evolved sophisticated camouflage techniques. The Kakapo's mottled green feathers allow him to melt into the undergrowth, so he becomes practically invisible. Kia are known for the magnificent orange blaze under their wings, yet when they fly, they are camouflage green on top, the rainbow of colour only visible from below. Camouflage and nocturnal behaviour are evolutionary responses to a predator that hunts in daylight, using its eyes. So what on earth were these birds hiding from? This beautiful bird is the New Zealand falcon. He's one of our few airborne predators, and he's a highly skilled hunter and an aerobatic expert. They've been clocked at over 200 kilometres an hour. No one knows when his ancestors arrived in primeval New Zealand, but joy of joys, he's not an Aussie. Most likely, his ancestors originated in South America. Based on the island phenomenon that just about any animal that arrived on these shores appeared to change rapidly, what would happen if, say, an eagle flew into primeval New Zealand? Remember the giant moa? I'm 6 foot and around 90 kilos. I'm almost as tall as the largest moa and only a third as heavy. Now, moa weren't nocturnal, and they certainly didn't have much camouflage.
So clearly, there was nothing this giant bird had to fear. Except there was. A 15-kilogram flying monster predator with a 3-meter wingspan. Haast's eagle.
And its main food source was the hapless moa. It couldn't outrun the eagle, and it certainly couldn't fly away. Its only defense was its colossal size and weight.
Limestone caves in Westland are littered with perfectly preserved fossil evidence of the struggles of these two giant birds.
Imagine the bird that was attached to this claw. We think it was just 1 million years ago that a small eagle flew into primeval New Zealand. Now that's probably about the size of its claw, and then it transformed into that. And yes, you guessed it, it originated in Australia.
Once the ancestor eagle arrived, island magic began. And in an exceptionally rapid series of mutations, the small eagle, roughly the size of our falcon, grew into the largest bird to ever terrorize the planet. Tragically, the more specialized the species, the less able they are to adapt to rapid change. Within 100 years of humans first occupying this land, moa were hunted to extinction. And deprived of its main prey, Haast's eagle disappeared also. Both species going extinct only 600 years ago. But the genetic memory of this supersized terror is still fresh for many of our birds, which is why they prefer the safety of night. It may have been confronting for us true blue Kiwis to learn the truth about the Australian origins of so many of our iconic animals.
But the bottom line is that any Aussie import that arrived on these shores immediately started evolving in a different direction until its shape and behaviours became uniquely Kiwi. But the question has to be asked, if so many Aussies arrived on these shores, was the reverse possible? Well, apparently not. The winds and the ocean currents don't support a directional flow from New Zealand to Australia. That said, anything that became Kiwi stayed uniquely Kiwi.
New Zealand and Australia parted company over 80 million years ago. But this story has proved our ties run deeper than ever thought before. Ultimately, it was our landscape and environment that sculpted these creatures into the forms we know today. And only the tough, resourceful, and smart survived. Attributes that perhaps still exist in us Kiwis today.